Among the sons of men who now filled the earth after the flood, one name would be spoken in awe and in fear: Nimrod. Born of Cush, the son of Ham, Nimrod was not like others. He was a mighty hunter beyond compare, a warrior of unnatural strength. When he walked the earth, lions shrank away, and the fiercest of creatures bowed before him. But it was not his own strength that set him apart. It was the garments he wore. These sacred garments were created in the days of Eden, given by God himself to Adam. Passed down through generations, they bore the mark of his favor. But now they were in the hands of a man who sought not the will of the Almighty, but power for himself. Clothed in these relics, Nimrod became an unstoppable force. With his strength, he bent the people to his will and became their king, building a mighty kingdom which he called Shinar. All the earth was under his command, united by one language. But power was not enough. Although his strength had come from God, Nimrod's heart was wicked, more wicked than any who had come before him. He forsook the ways of his fathers and bowed to gods of wood and stone. His right-hand man, Terah, who was by his side from the days of his early conquests, was given authority over all his hosts, and the two men seemed to fear neither God nor man. One night, in the silence of his palace, Nimrod's conjurers and wise men beheld a disturbing sight in the heavens. An enormous star in the east tore through the sky, swallowing everything in its path. Shaken, they consulted each other and came to the same conclusion. That very same night, a child had been born to Terah, a child who would one day rule the earth and conquer kings, even a king as great as Nimrod. Trembling, they approached the king and shared the signs they had seen in the heavens. Nimrod recoiled in fury. He could not stand idly by while a threat to his throne lived, even if it came from the newborn son of his most trusted friend and ally. The wise men advised him to kill the child at once while he was still weak and helpless, and Nimrod agreed. Sending for Terah, he offered to fill his house with silver and gold in exchange for the life of his youngest son, Abram. Terah's heart stood still as he heard the king's command. He was the king's servant and closest friend, but he could not bring himself to do as he asked. Seeing that Nimrod's anger was growing stronger by the moment, Terah returned to his house and took a newborn child from his servants, sacrificing his life to spare Abram's. Realizing that his son could no longer stay in his household, Terah secreted him and his mother away in the cover of darkness, hiding them in a cave for 10 years to save him from the king's wrath. After this time had passed, Abram went to the house of Noah and lived there for 39 years, learning the ways of the Lord from the man who'd been spared from the great flood. He saw the vast sky, the rolling hills, and the endless beauty of the heavens, and questions began to stir in his mind. Some men worshipped the sun, yet the sun set every day. Some worshipped the moon, but the moon too waned at daybreak. The gods of men were carried around on carts made by the hands of men, yet men bowed before them. How could the things which were created be greater than the one who created it? Abram realized that the God of Noah was the one true God who had created the whole earth and everyone in it, and that mankind had turned away from him to wickedness and false idols. And the most wicked of them all, King Nimrod, was not satisfied with power and dominion over all men. He sought to rule not only the earth, but the heavens themselves. The people had multiplied, and their cities had grown strong, but they feared the judgment of God, as the memory of the great flood still lingered in their minds like a shadow. And so they turned to their mighty ruler Nimrod, who had no fear of heaven. The idea began as a whisper, a challenge to the will of the Almighty. What if they could build a tower so great and so high that no flood could ever reach them again? They could make a name for themselves, reign over their enemies, and ensure that they would never be scattered across the world. And Nimrod, who had already set himself against God, saw in this plan something greater than mere survival. If men could reach the sky, if they could stand in the realm of the divine, what need would they have for God? The work began. From every corner of Shinar, men and women gathered in a valley which was 2 days east of the city. Stones were carved, bricks were fired, mortar was mixed. The people worked as one, their purpose clear. This was a monument to the defiance of man, a declaration that they would no longer be ruled by the heavens. Day by day, the tower climbed, higher and higher, until its peak was lost in the clouds. From below, it seemed a thing of wonder, an achievement beyond the reach of any kingdom before it. But to God, it was folly, for no man could build his way to heaven. The wrath of the Lord came at last, but not with fire or flood or sword, but something far more devastating to their ambitions. The language of men was shattered. Words that had once been clear now became meaningless. Orders turned to confusion. A man would call for a stone, and his brother would bring him water. A worker would ask for a hammer and receive a torch. Panic spread like fire, and in that moment, the great unity of Shinar collapsed. God punished each man according to his intentions, scattering many across the face of the earth, causing others to slay each other in anger and confusion, and turning some into beasts no better than apes and elephants. The work that had begun with such pride ended in chaos, and the tower stood incomplete. From that day forward, the place was called Babel, for there the Lord had confused the language of all the earth, and from that place he scattered them, sending them in all directions to fill the world as he had commanded long ago. A great fire descended from heaven, consuming 1/3 of the Tower of Babel, while the earth opened and swallowed yet another third. The remaining third God left as a reminder to mankind of the folly of human arrogance and the futility of challenging the Almighty. Meanwhile, Abram, now a man of 50 years, returned to his father's house. Terah still served the idols of Nimrod's court, crafting false gods from wood and stone. Abram's heart burned with anger when he saw his father bow to these lifeless statues in place of the living God, and determined that he would show him the error of his ways. Asking his mother to fetch him a young goat from the flock, Abram carefully prepared a savory dish and laid it before the gods, hoping that he would tempt them to eat. But not one of them moved, or blinked, or showed any signs of life. Abram laughed. Perhaps they were not hungry, or the meal he prepared was not to their liking. The next day he tried again, this time offering a feast prepared by his mother from the meat of 3 of the finest goats in their flock. He watched and waited, but again, not a single movement or trace of life. Abram could stand this folly no longer, and taking up a hatchet, he struck down the false idols, shattering them one by one. Roused by the noise of the broken wood and stone, Terah rushed into the room where his beloved gods were housed, only to see them strewn across the floor in pieces. All that is, except the largest of the idols, who was untouched and holding a hatchet. Furious, he demanded to know who had dared to commit this act of treason. But Abram was unmoved, staring calmly ahead. He explained that he laid an offering of meat before the statues, but the smaller ones went to eat before the largest had taken a bite. Angered by their disrespect, the largest statue took up the hatchet and destroyed the rest. Terah scoffed, his face twisting in disbelief. He accused Abram of mockery, declaring that the idols had no life, no will to act on their own. Meeting his father's gaze, Abram challenged him, asking why he worshipped something that could not move, could not see, and could not save. Before Terah could muster a response, Abram snatched the hatchet from the remaining idol, broke it into pieces, and fled. Enraged and fearful of Nimrod's wrath, Terah went before the king to ask for judgment, and Abram was brought to the royal court. Standing before Nimrod's mighty throne, Abram remained unafraid. Once again, he declared that the idols they served were false, and that there was but one God, the creator of heaven and earth. Nimrod's expression darkened, and he ordered Abram to be cast into prison while he consulted with his advisors on a fitting punishment for such blatant rebellion. Because he had insulted their gods, they reasoned, it was only right that he should suffer the worst torment imaginable, to be burned alive in a fiery furnace. All the inhabitants of the land gathered to see this great spectacle. But when Abram was brought forth, the king's counselors came to a fearful realization. This was the child whose birth was heralded by signs in the heavens, the child who would grow to rule the earth and destroy kings. Shaking with fury, Nimrod sent for Terah, who admitted the truth. He had hid the child from the king out of fatherly love for all these years. But knowing the king's wrath, he was too afraid to take full responsibility for his betrayal, blaming his elder son, Haran, for persuading him to do it. This was a terrible lie, but Haran was seized nonetheless and brought with Abram to be cast into the fire together. The brothers were thrown into the flaming furnace, which burned so hot that it killed even the men who threw them in. Haran was burnt to ashes instantly, but the Lord loved Abram and took compassion on him, sparing him from the deadly flames. For 3 days and nights, Abram stood unharmed in the furnace, walking amidst the flames. Astonished, Nimrod at last ordered him to be removed, and Abram emerged unscathed, even his clothes untouched by the fire. Fear crept into the hearts of the gathered people. This was no ordinary man. This was one chosen by the Almighty. Though afraid, Nimrod could not destroy him. Instead, he sent him away, granting him wealth and land. But their struggle was not over. Just 2 years later, Nimrod awoke in the night, drenched in a cold sweat. He had dreamed a dream unlike any before, a nightmarish vision of what was to come. In the dream, he stood in a valley surrounded by his armies and staring into his fiery furnace. As he gazed proudly into the flames, a figure emerged, unscathed, untouched. Abram, the son of Terah, the man who'd been thrown into the fire and lived. But he was no longer a mere man. In his hand, he held a gleaming sword, and armed with this weapon, he sprang at Nimrod, who fled from him in terror. As he did, an egg struck him, which cracked open and became a mighty flowing river. The waters surged, rushing over the valley and consuming his army in a raging flood while he watched in horror. Only 3 men remained beside him who wore kingly garments and had noble bearings. They ran together, the last survivors of a drowning world. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the flood was gone. The land lay dry once more, and before Nimrod's eyes, the river diminished until it was an egg once again. But from this egg, a young bird emerged. Its wings flared, and its eyes locked onto him. Without hesitation, it flew towards him, swift as an arrow, and with a single strike, it tore into his face and plucked out his eye. A terrible weight crushed his chest, and Nimrod awoke in fear and panic. The king summoned his wise men and sorcerers to tell him the meaning of this strange and foreboding vision. But only one dared to speak: Anarchy, the king's trusted servant. This dream was no accident, he said, but a warning about Abram, the man in the fire. A time would come when his descendants would rise, waging war against the armies of the king. They would crush his hosts and strike down his forces, and only he and the 3 kings who fled would remain. And the bird, the one that had plucked out the king's eye, it was a sign of death. One day, the seed of Abram would bring an end to Nimrod's reign. The king listened in silence. It was clear that Abram could not be permitted to live. He ordered his servants to seize Abram and put an end to the threat once and for all. But God had other plans. Eliezer, Abram's servant, had overheard Nimrod's command and hurried to his master to urge him to flee at once. Fearing for his life, Abram left in secret to the house of Noah, where the king's men could not find him. But with a heavy heart, he came to the realization that the time had come for him to leave this land, or else be hunted for the rest of his life. Abram persuaded his father, Terah, to leave with him to Canaan, where they would be safe from Nimrod's wrath. And so their family departed. Their journey took them through Haran, a prosperous land with pasture for their flocks and safety for the travelers. For 3 years, they stayed in this oasis of peace until God called Abram once again to Canaan. So he left, bringing with him his wife and children as God commanded. And to reward him for his obedience, God promised him and his descendants the land of Canaan as an inheritance. Abram continued to walk in the ways of the Lord, following him wherever he was instructed to go.